I've come early.
Nonsense. Early does not exist in the eyes of destiny. Sit, sit. I have a pot of soup ready to cook. It will take a bit, but I welcome the company.
Thank you. This is just what I need to cure my spirits. Feels as if the entire day has gone by, and I cannot pin down a thing that has happened in it. Any day that occurs as such, I count as a terrible day.
Well, a terrible day can be turned on its head by a good night.
Did you have a terrible day? I'm sorry.
I must not complain. I've had much worse.
I empathize with you. We were quite restless today, weren't we, ladies?
Indeed.
Is that not every day?
Your tongue is sharp today, I see.
I meant for myself, too.
Soup's on. It'll need a bit before it's ready.
I'm sure it's worth the wait. It smells delicious.
What was that?
It sounded like a steed.
Madam, do you expect anyone else around the fire tonight?
We never expect, we only hope.
Well, I hear it no more. Perhaps it was only someone passing by.
Odd to be out so late.
I do not think it so odd. May I remind you, we're all here.
Lord, but it got close very quickly.
A lone horseman wandering in the night. Could it be?
But do not speak the name. Perhaps you will encourage him to approach.
What a rash thing to assume that any passing rider is the headless.
Just the same, let us not secure the possibility.
Excuse me, may I sit by your fire for a moment?
Oh, thank the Lord.
Sorry?
Pay him no mind. We heard your steed and thought you were someone else. Welcome, stranger. Please sit. You look weary.
Thank you. It has been a long journey, and I've been waiting for a moment to give the horse a rest and stretch my legs.
Are you hungry? Madam's making some soup.
Of course he's hungry. Just look at the man. He looks like he hasn't had a meal in a week.
You will be the first to taste it.
Once it's ready.
The journey was arduous, though I did stop for sustenance a way back. I was hoping to reach my destination before nightfall, but one is not always so lucky.
Is Sleepy Hollow your aim?
It is.
Then you have reached it. You're just on the skirts of town, though at this hour, you won't see a living soul for miles.
Well, I am glad to have reached my destination, and I'm glad to finally be in Sleepy Hollow. I've been studying this town for some years.
You've been studying it?
Yes. Sleepy Hollow and its rumors of oddity, apparitions in the night, trances and visions coming upon even travelers by. Such talk has reached my ears from afar, and I cannot but seek it out.
A pleasant land, drowsy head it was, of the dreams that wave before the hat-shut eye, and gay castles and clouds that pass, forever flushing round a summer sky.
Yes, I've heard that one before. In the great span of conversation about the paranormal, Sleepy Hollow crops up abundantly.
We were just whispering about ghost stories, weren't we?
Oh, are you fans of a grim tale?
I mean, it's hard not to be, given the fire and the eerie nature of these woods. We find ourselves led to such conversation frequently. And, as you said yourself, Sleepy Hollow is abundant in its talk of such things.
You haven't come for the talk itself, have you?
Other business brings me to the vicinity, but the added benefit of the talk certainly sweetens the visit. Like a moth to the flame I've come.
And like that moth, you will find your peril. That is the call of Sleepy Hollow.
No need to use such incendiary language.
The madam has spoken. She likes her fires nice and amiable. Isn't that right?
Ah, I didn't mean harm, but it's the truth. Lovely madam, you wish to ease his fears, but I tell you, it is better for the man to worry. Mark my words, there's nothing you'll be wanting in this town, boy. Not if you want what's good for you. The place is bewitched. It's said that during the early days of settlement, a high German doctor lay a curse on it in retribution of some old spite regarding the
No, not a curse and not a doctor. It was an old Indian chief who held powwows here before the country was discovered by Master Hedrick Hudson.
He was the prophet, or wizard, or some such of his tribe, and his preternatural effect has laid like a blanket over the town since his death.
Not how I heard it.
Well, however the story goes, the town still continues under the sway of some witching power. Some sport a spell over the minds of the good people, causing them to walk in eternal reverie.
The eternal reverie. Yes, I've heard that this is the case, but you cannot count yourselves included in such a state. I find you all to be amiable and very pleasant, not at all dreamlike.
Well, we are residents of Sleepy Hollow. That much is true. We gather on such cold nights to receive the kindly hospitality of the madam, but we all find ourselves included in that strange little curse when we leave the warmth of the fire. Perhaps the madam casts her own spells when she gathers us round.
The madam does not curse us.
Then a counter curse, perhaps. The weary traveler is right. I feel quite lucid right now.
A curse certainly makes sense for all the stories that have accumulated. It would be wonderful to hear the stories from the town's very own residents.
I dare say we could tell you a few.
And it is good to hear that you all persevere in keeping the stories alive.
Is that not the objective of stories? To keep them alive, so in turn keeping ourselves alive.
What? Shall we die without story?
Many ghost stories are cautionary tales.
And yes, I believe we would die without story. Our spirits, at least.
And the spirits that the stories speak of are certainly kept alive in their retelling.
Spirits? The spirits are dead.
Back home in my own village, there's no encouragement for ghosts. The tales are few and far between, though I should say the blame may fall on the constant desire for travel. Any ghost would scarcely have time to finish their first nap and turn themselves in their grave before their surviving friends had traveled away from the neighborhood, so that when they turn out at night to walk their rounds, they have no acquaintance with the Hollow Ground.
Sleepy Hollow does not abide by those rules. Most of the townfolk have been here their whole lives. Many come, that is for sure. But few leave this sleepy little place.
Now, you make it sound like a horror story.
How quickly you assume I had a negative connotation. It could be that perhaps the citizens of Sleepy Hollow simply enjoy being here.
I'd believe in a horror story over the likes of that. We all have our own personal tales we could tell of Sleepy Hollow.
And such tales they are. They can't be that bad if we're still here to tell them. Whatever form of aggrandizement we inflict upon the ghosts of old, they cannot be so ferocious if we still find ourselves in Sleepy Hollow after all these years.
You are correct. Dear stranger, our worried friends put silly notions into your head. If there were such a curse condemning this sleepy little hollow, it is not a bad curse. My life boasts just as much contentment as the next. No, I believe that while perhaps some of the tales in circulation are true, I do not deny that for a second, most are only superstition and hearsay.
Hearsay? I've seen things with my own eyes.
Then why do you reside here? Still.
I don't rightfully know.
Pray tell, if you have a story, I would love to hear it. I'm curious to what you have seen.
Then I should be glad to tell it. I am sure you have heard of the late Major Andre.
I have not.
That is a surprise, for I should think that of any of the stories of Sleepy Hollow, Major Andre's should be widely known.
Or at least the wretched soul's name. Major Andre, the man who struck a deal with Benedict Arnold?
I do not know the name.
Let me tell the story. John Andre was a British lieutenant involved in the defense of St. John's, which, as I hope you know, we took in 1775. He became a prisoner of war and was transported to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He was such a charismatic young fellow, well educated, and in his time as a prisoner of war, he became well liked by many. Perhaps that gave him more freedom than the American soldiers realized. In 1780, he made secret negotiations with Benedict Arnold for the surrender of West Point in exchange for £20,000. You at least must have heard of that. He was returning to New York after his secret liaison when he met 3 American militiamen near Sleepy Hollow, right by that tulip tree in the middle of town. I know not what words were exchanged, but old Andre must have mistaken one of the men for a Hessian, and therefore thought the men to be loyalists, consequently revealing himself as a British officer. Well, What do you do with a well-loved man who betrays your country? You must try him for espionage. There's no way around it. It's how the world works. But he had many men fighting for him, to be sure. The British Army attempted to exchange Arnold for Andre to no avail. Alexander Hamilton himself, who was then Washington's close aide, intervened and requested death by shooting, which was Andre's preference. And by all means, it would have been a much more pleasant death than a hanging. But Washington made it clear that he was to be punished as a spy. So Major Andre was convicted and then executed in October of 1780.
Forgive me, but this does not sound like a ghost story. You said you had seen something to inspire the tale?
Yes, I did say that. His execution was perhaps not worthy of a ghost story, no. But let us examine in our minds the tulip tree, which stands on the spot of Andre's capture. Have you seen it? No, of course you haven't seen it. You've only just arrived. Enormous it is, towering like a giant above all the other trees of the neighborhood, and forming a kind of landmark. Its limbs are gnarled and fantastic, twisting down almost to earth and rising again into the air. It's known universally as Major Andre's tree. It was at this tree that Andre made his mistake and was apprehended, where they searched his pockets and captured him. Many regard the tulip tree with a mixture of respect and superstition, partly out of sympathy for the fate of its ill-starred namesake, and partly from the tales of strange sights and doleful lamentations told concerning it. Many pass this tree and speak of an ill feeling in that vicinity, and in truth, every time I draw near, I feel something strange in me. There have been nights when I swore I saw something white, hanging in the midst of the tree, but there was never anything there. I would hear a groan, but it was always the rubbing of one huge bough against another, as they swayed about in the breeze. Yes, there was always an explanation for the noises and the illusions that a fearful passerby might conjure, but never any explanation for the desolation that one feels as they pass Major Andre's tree. It is always more than just sympathy or uneasiness that one feels near this arboreal beast. It is that sense of despair, of sickened realization, of abandoned hope, that only Andre could have felt when he was discovered, and what a quick mistake he made, and what an eternal consequence.
He betrayed our country. I believe that warrants some sort of punishment, though perhaps not execution. The thought of that makes my skin crawl.
He was a British citizen. He had lived here for many years, but as a prisoner of war. We may condemn Andre as Americans, but I cannot bring myself to condemn him as a human being.
What an admirable tale, but there's a detail that fails to follow logic. Why does the spirit haunt the tree, not the grave where his body lies?
Would you be able to get the place of your biggest mistake off your mind?
No, I imagine not. Well, I suppose then I must go.
So soon?
Please return whenever you can.
What a chilling story. And the way he told it, he seemed deeply affected.
It's a personal story for him. I've heard him tell the tale many a time around this same fire.
Tell me, does the story remain the same in each retelling?
I beg your pardon?
Well, sometimes I find that the more the body tells a story, the longer it gets, or the more involved.
I think you will find, dear stranger, that for your new acquaintance, the tale is ingrained on his mind, and changes not a bit. To change would be a kindness.
Well, it's chilling all the same.
Chill you want? If a chill is what you want, then you must hear about the legend of the Lady in White.
The Lady in White?
Sir, you say you have studied the stories of Sleepy Hollow, but this is now the second story you haven't heard. Pray tell, what stories do you know?
Well, perhaps I have heard this one, if you may remind me of the details.
You have not, but I will. Years ago, there was a young woman in the community by the name of Eleanor DeWalt. She was the daughter of a well-to-do family with a substantial property on the eastern part of town. And there was never a moment that Eleanor felt herself in need. She wore her frilly frocks and attended balls and parties, and was never expected to even lift a finger for the washing and cleaning and cooking and such. She held a privileged position in society, and was not expected to stoop so low. Her 2 servant girls took care of her every need. All she had to do was sit and greet those of elevation such as hers and smile and make good conversation. But Eleanor wanted more. She begrudged even her servants, wishing for something to do beyond sitting and gazing out of the window, from which she was seen sighing and fidgeting as if the world was just beyond her fingertips. One such part of this outside world was a roguish young man who lived a few minutes' walk down the road. He and Eleanor met a few times at various gatherings, though his sort were not the kind who were ever seen in conversation with her sort, and so it was that the two began to court in secret. The couple would meet under the cover of nightfall by the dark glen at Raven Rock.
A secret love affair? How gauche?
She found love, sir, which was something that she had not found within the confines of even her own home, and freedom, a sort of freedom in the moment stolen in the glen, and they would have continued to get away with it without a care in the world of how society would pull them eventually, had a young gentleman not come to call on Eleanor one evening with the goal of Eleanor's hand in marriage. Her mother and father had been waiting for this. Their daughter finally married into a family that matched her respectability, and Eleanor found herself in a difficult position. No one knew of her secret vow, and no one would have approved if they had known. And so, she found herself accepting the proposal.
Is it not a blessing for a woman to fulfill her obligation to her family? Accepting the hand of this man in marriage was only proper.
How very proper it is for a woman to say goodbye to her freedom. Eleanor had that very thought in mind. She needed to say goodbye. When the gentleman left her home, the world began to snow. It felt to Eleanor like an omen. She had previously made arrangements to rendezvous with her beau once everyone had gone to sleep in the evening. And so, that night, though the snow continued to come down with a dreadful power, she slipped out of the house to meet him. Unfortunate for her, the storm had dissuaded him from venturing out into the night, and Eleanor, with no thought for the future she'd succumb to, went out to foolishly meet a man who would not come. She was found in a snowdrift the next morning, underneath a large branch from a nearby tree. It's believed that the storm knocked the bough atop her on her fateful night walk. Oh, and the talk of the town the next day, hearing that a proposal had been made, and so swiftly after a death had resulted. Her beau remained silent, unwilling to be caught up in the ordeal, and so her death became a speculation.
But death could not contain her, it seemed, for it was not long before Eleanor's ghostly apparition was seen gazing through the windows of the DeWalt house, and on stormy evenings many have caught a glimpse of Eleanor at Raven Rock. She is gowned in white, gaunt, and colorless as the snow, gazing right through you in her search for her beau.
And many have claimed to hear her shriek, as if the wind itself had been given a voice, an echo of the moment that the fallen tree befell her. The story goes that her 2 servants were drawn out of the house upon seeing their mistress's ghastly image, and were also found the next morning frozen to death in the snow. It is a bad omen, it is, to see the image of Eleonora in the window. She brings death.
To this day, she is still searching for her beau, drawing those who will out to meet her at her rendezvous.
Perhaps. Or perhaps she's searching for her escape. She never found one in the end.
Going out and getting herself killed certainly wasn't an escape. Imagine being stuck as an apparition instead of living a lavish life such as hers, with men at her doorstep and her share of happy secrets. A life well wasted, if you ask me.
I'll leave the storytelling up to the rest of you now. There's someone we're meeting on the other side of town.
Farewell, and thank you for the tale. Sir, you seem to have a quip for every story told. Perhaps you have a better tale to tell.
I have, in fact. These fine people of whom our company comprised told wonderful tales, but there's nothing to be afraid of in these stories.
If I were to see a specter, I would certainly be afraid.
Not from the stories these good folks have told. You'd just be sad. How sad for Major Andre. How sad for the Landy and White. But both tales easily avoidable.
One cannot state the simplicity of a task without having done it.
Perhaps not. But fear is the target of a good ghost story. It must remind us of our own frail state in life, subject to fate's grasp. Fear brews in all of us, most of us, and dictates what our every action shall be. We fear a life of poverty and squalor, so we wake up early each morning and set off to do our day's work and provide for ourselves and our families. We fear disease and decay, so we treat our body with hearty food to keep us nourished and strong. But nothing is greater than the fear we instill in each other. Just a few years passed, a new school teacher was hired in Sleepy Hollow by the name of Jacob Williams. He was a good man and always rendered himself both useful and agreeable to those in his community. He assisted the farmers occasionally in the lighter labors of their farms, helped to make hay, mended the fences, took the horses to water, that sort of task. But, ingratiated as he was with the parents, he could not seem to sway the children to give him the respect for which he asked. They taunted him in the schoolyard and played cruel tricks on him. They took to the occasional stopping of the chimney in the schoolhouse to smoke him out, and on one or more occasion, Mr. Williams would unlock the doors to find every chair and desk turned topsy-turvy, so that he began to think that all the witches in the country held their meetings in his very own schoolhouse.
A gullible protagonist for our ghost story.
No, not gullible. Our school teacher is not gullible. If you were to come into a room and see everything strewn about, with the door carefully locked and no explanation for their arrangement, what would your mind conclude? When presented with such a situation, I should venture to think that you would have the same inklings as Mr. Williams.
Go on, then.
The torment from the children went on and on, until one day our school teacher went for an evening walk along the river. A group of children saw him and began to follow him into the bit of woods near his residence. I say woods, it was perhaps an acre of trees, very densely populated with a little path running through it. A common point of rendezvous during the daylight hours. For some reason, Mr. Williams preferred the walk by moonlight. On the night of his fateful story, it was about midnight. The children should have been in bed. So should he, but that was a matter for another time. The children followed the man into the path of the woods, keeping to the trees. So closely knit were these trees, and so thick around Mr. Williams could not see the children surrounding him. They began to whisper strange murmurings to each other, striking such fear into the man's heart, as he believed he was being followed by spirits. He began to hurry through the rest of the woods. Though hurrying in the wooded path can prove treacherous, just as Mr. Williams was about to break through to open air, one of the children reached out from the place behind the tree and grabbed a hold of the man's ankle, hoping to give him an extra fright. And that it did, so much that Mr. Williams' heart seized right on the spot.
He died of fright?
If only Mr. Williams had been a bit braver, perhaps he would still be teaching those unruly children, still going on those night walks. But at last, fear is what gets you in the end. It's an important lesson. Never let fear overcome you. It is a rule I abide by, so much that such silly stories of our companions' past not ruffle me in the least.
Is fear not the fun of such a story? There would be no reason to tell such tales if your audience did not want to feel the thrill.
Perhaps, though it shows a truly courageous man whose heart does not quicken at such silly stories. Someone of sound mind and heart. Mr. Williams would not have managed, that is for sure. He died at the cost of a harmless prank. He was found the next morning, the town was shaken by this event, and arrangements were made for the funeral. A new school teacher was hired, and life went on, but to this day, you may occasionally see our old school teacher making his way through the wooded path, or perhaps through the window of the schoolhouse you will see him sitting in a silent reverie, thinking about the prank that sealed his fate.
Were the students ever punished?
No one ever knew the man had died at their hands. His body was found at the edge of the woods, and it was assumed that he died alone. The children never said a word.
Are you one of the children?
No, this was a few years back.
I must ask you to leave now.
Me, but...
You may return tomorrow evening. You will be late.
Wait. Yes, I suppose I will. Thank you, madam. I will return.
Whatever can he be late for at this hour?
My dear stranger, tell me, do you know the legend of the Headless Horseman?
It has a familiar ring to it.
I thought it might. Shall I stoke the memory in your mind?
Of course. I love a good story.
We've all heard the horsemen thundering past at some point or another, said to be the apparition of a Hessian trooper who was killed in some battle in the Revolutionary War. The legend has it that his head was carried away by a cannonball and his body was buried in the old church by the bridge in Sleepy Hollow.
It is said that the ghost rides forth to the scene of the battle in nightly quest of his head.
Have you seen him?
I have lived in Sleepy Hollow since my youth, a most heretical young woman, for I did not believe in ghosts. Quite the outlier in that time I was, but my heresy soon changed. I was on the far side of town one night and was subjected to the misfortune of a jilt. So abandoned as I was, I found myself several miles from home and with no one to offer me passage. A young lady fears such a situation, but I did not want to make more of it than need be, so I began to walk. On my journey home, I heard a galloping. I turned and looked into the dark shadow of the grove before me and beheld a rider most unusual, huge, misshapen, and towering. He stopped before me, gathered up in the gloom like some gigantic monster ready to spring upon an unsuspecting victim, his steed panting and blowing. In the dark, I could not make out his face. In all truth, I could not make out much of anything. But here I was, miles from my bed and how late it was, and I dismissed all propriety of the situation. I petitioned for help. I soon found myself obliged to get up behind the figure, and we galloped over bush and brake, over hill and swamp, until we reached the bridge by the old church.
And?
You know the rest of the story.
I beg pardon?
When we reached the bridge, I turned to look up at the face of the man who had come to my rescue and received a fright, for there was no face to perceive, no head upon the man's shoulders. I screamed and threw myself from the man's arms, off the steed, tumbling into the brook. And the man, that galloping Hessian of the hollow, bolted on his goblin horse and vanished in a flash of fire.
It is an interesting story you tell. I do recognize it.
We shall see you tomorrow night, dear stranger.